Maybe don't know.
This time to build. This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 80 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. Wow, episode 80. Do you guys remember back in the first 10 episodes when I was like, not sure if I'll continue doing this or not, but, well, I think I can safely say that it's official. Officially official. And I'm going to have a fair amount to say at the end of this episode, so I'm not going to linger here, but I do want to tell you some dates that we have coming up before we get started with this. First off, I'll be emceeing the So Ill Showdown on the final couple days of March, and then the following week, Monday the 2nd, Tuesday the 3rd, I'll be doing a couple of different workshops, including 2 semi-private sessions, which are limited to 5 people each, for 2 hours, and each person will walk away with completely customized advice. You'll be able to sign up for those at Climb So Ill very, very soon. I'm actually going to send them an email as soon as I get this podcast out. So if you're in St. Louis, definitely come and check those out. I would love to work with you. I will also be at the Climb Strong Performance Coaching Seminar in Columbia, Maryland on April 6th, 7th, and 8th. You can learn more about that at performanceclimbingcoach.com if you're interested. And then the following week, April 10th through the 14th, Nate and I will both be in Virginia at Sport Rock doing workshops, getting to know the folks out there. It's our first trip to VA, so if you're in the area, please come and see us. All right, let's get on with this, shall we? And Becca Taggart, since you asked so nicely, out of the blue, but nicely, hope this one helps on your road trip.
Maybe don't know.
This time.
I'm going to just kill the hangboard. And I did. I let the goal become the hangboard and I crushed it, but I forgot the climbing.
This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
Little jungle.
Yeah, all that rain last night made it super humid today.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that at all. I left Ohio to get out of the humidity and just apparently brought it with me.
That's what it reminded me of. It reminded me of like being back east, just like
Yep.
stepping off the plane into the swamp and you're just like, whoa.
Yeah, that's exactly how today felt. I didn't even hear it rain last night. These guys.
That was nice.
These
That
guys
was
were
nice.
like-
It was nice. I was like, ooh, it's raining. Great.
Yeah.
And I woke up this morning. I was like, oh, it's raining. It's hot, humid.
Do I really have to go ride in this? So I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. You know, we've missed each other last year during OR and we've talked a few times back and forth. And one of the first ways that I kind of came across your training and your ideas was your assessment that you have online.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've struggled with, is figuring out the best way to do assessments, what to measure, how to measure them. You know, climbing is this multifaceted kind of nebulous thing in a lot of ways, and finding those measurements has been difficult.
Yeah.
And you said you've been thinking a lot about the assessments and how to do them, and I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts on what you've been thinking about. So
Yeah. So the assessment, like, I started with it years back, and there's been multiple iterations. Recently, well, kind of in the spring, my buddy Casey Webb got the ball rolling. He was asking the same questions, and we were just kind of like, well, let's try to sort of figure something out. So we put together this massive assessment that had, everything like bench press, deadlift, overhead press, campusing, hanging, moonboarding, like the whole, just basically threw the kitchen sink at it. It took like a week to do the assessment. So nobody wanted to do it. So we were basically like, well, we did it. It's like, anybody else want to do this? No one wanted to do it. So we had like no data.
Yeah, you had an N of 2.
N of 2, it wasn't very productive or informative. So then what I started doing is I was like, well, let's try to pull this apart a little bit. And I just kind of made the short assessment, which is the one I've been doing a lot lately for the past few months. And my N is getting up there. People are doing it. And it's basically 3 things. And it's you can do it in 1 day. 2 days is probably best.
Sure.
Let's do the 2-day version. So it'd be day 1, warm up, and then you spend about an hour to an hour and a half climbing up to your max boulder in a day. So you're in a day maximum boulder grade.
Yep.
And the idea is you want it to be on a boulder problem. Well, optimally it's a moonboard problem. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be on a moonboard. It should just be something like 30 to 50 degrees overhanging and short, like 15 to 25 seconds time spent on the wall. And the moonboard just kind of works really well for that particular thing.
Yeah, so then it's easy. It's easy to measure, get the, know what the numbers are, and have it be something that's repeatable later down the line. And that's not always available in a normal gym.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then it comes into play with day 2 as well, which we can get to in a sec. So day 1, you do that max boulder. Then you do a maximum 7-second hang from an edge. Pick the edge.
Maximum with weight added.
Maximum with weight added. As much weight as you can hang for 7 seconds from an edge.
Yep.
Edges can vary from whatever, 10 mil. The new tension board has some really good edges at like 10 mil and 15 mil and 20 mil. And then the Beastmaker board has good ones. It's mostly, the edge size is particular to the climber. Like if you're really strong, you'd use a slightly smaller edge. But basically a 7-second max hang, and then a 1 rep max pull-up, max weight added. So that's day 1.
Okay.
Then day 2 is you warm up again, and then you find a boulder problem that's similar in style and length to the day 1 max boulder problem, but 2 grades easier. And that's where the moonboard really comes into play, because sometimes you can even find a problem that's like uses the same hold.
Sure, yeah.
And it's 2 grades easier.
Yep.
And then for that one, what you're going to do is you're going to do reps on that boulder problem with a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio.
Okay.
So you can do as many times as you can, 1-to-1 work to rest. So it's usually about like, 15 to 20 seconds on, 15 to 20 seconds off is what it tends to work out to. And then the next part of the test is you take 80% of the total weight you hung on the first day using the same edge, and you do 7-3 repeaters for as many as you can do.
Okay.
And then the third part of the test is taking 80% of your pull-up weight and doing as many reps as you can with that.
Okay. Why 80%?
Because I think 80% is a good strength zone, sort of a strength tester. I think when we start getting too low in the 70s, some people can just crank off reps, and it just
becomes more strength endurance.
Becomes a lot more strength endurance. And I think when you get up above 90, it starts to get to be a bit more of a recruitment thing. So it's sort of more neuromuscular, whereas that 80-85% zone is sort of where I'm finding is kind of like the magic. It's where the magic happens. It's like I'm considering that now sort of that's the area that I think climbers really need to be focusing on, like 75 to 85%. And if boulders, route climbers, what have you, you focus on that zone, and then 2-3 weeks out from your trip or climbing season rolls around, that's when you kind of tune up. So if you're going on a bouldering trip, you might want to start recruiting a bit more. If you're doing some routes, you might want to start doing some aerobic power, some anaerobic capacity stuff to kind of get that fitness up. But if you kind of maintain your year strength in that kind of 80% zone, 5 reps, I'm calling it, I think that's kind of my new sort of philosophy on training.
Yeah.
I kind of maintain that, work on that area.
Cool. What about just out of curiosity, what about the route climbers who are, Red River climbers who are mostly endurance people, or Maple Canyon climbers, is there some sort of endurance assessment test that you think would work for them?
So this is where the test is really kind of interesting. And the interesting part, the data is coming back. It's kind of interesting. And it's in the reps section of it. Mm-hmm. And what I'm finding is that for the 7.3, we'll start with the 7.3 repeater one. I've had a bunch of people do it, hardcore boulderers to actually maple climbers and people who do sort of all in between. And we're averaging out at about 9 reps. So 7 seconds on, 3 off, about 9 times. It's like 9.09. And what's interesting about that to me is that correlates really well with, I don't know if you've ever seen those the National Strength Conditioning charts where you predict your one rep max based on how many reps you do. And it works out to be about, it's at about their 77.5%. They say you should be able to do about 9 reps.
Right.
Now, the first thing is that those charts are kind of useless in the sense that if you can do 9 reps with something that doesn't very well predict what your 1 rep max is going to be.
Right.
Because you have people who are like more endurance folks and more strength folks. Mm-hmm. So what happens is on average, the 7.3 hangs has converged to about 9 reps. But then what I'm seeing within that is you're seeing some people who are doing 12, a girl who did 18 reps, and then other people who are doing like 5 and 6. So what's happening, to get back to the Red River Gorge question, is what that test shows us is that if the person does much more than 9 reps, then that means they're very strength, energy efficient, and enduring, but they could really use more max strength.
Right.
So they're not recruiting that well. Whereas the person who does say 5 reps is maximally recruiting. And what they need to do is they need to not necessarily get more endurance. It's that they need to get more strength, I think. And I think there's a difference between that recruitment where you just fire everything and strength. Okay. And that's where the 5 reps comes into play. So what happens is those folks who are on the, doing the 5 or 6 reps max at 80% on the hangs, when they start to try to do 5 reps at 80%, they struggle with it. Right. Whereas the person who's doing a bunch of reps, they're just cruising the 5 reps.
Right.
But the thing is, their max weight should be going up a lot. So what the test tells you is that, okay, you are a person that needs to either be working in the lower rep range to get your strength up, or you're a person that needs to be working in the higher rep range to get your strength up. Mm-hmm. And then that correlates with the moonboard reps, which are working out to be about 5.5 reps on those moonboard. I'm calling them reps.
Sure.
So 1 lap.
Yep.
Which is really kind of interesting because then you're seeing people who are doing, they're getting say 5 sets or 5 reps on the hangs, and they do their 2 grade down moonboard problem like twice. And then other people who are getting 18 reps on the hangs, and they're doing their 2 grade down problem like 15 times.
Right.
So what you see there is you see that nice correlation. And then what I would say to the Red River Gorge climber that just did 15 reps on the moonboard, you got to spend more time doing some maximum bouldering. Toss the weight vest on, really try to get your bouldering up.
Yep.
And that will ultimately get your enduro going. Because you can only get so fit, right? Your aerobic power can only go so far.
Yeah, totally.
And your anaerobic capacity can only go so far. And the same goes true for the boulder who's recruiting highly. Like you can only recruit so much of your forearms and your lats to hold on to the wall. Eventually, you're going to be recruiting everything you got.
Right.
And
you just have to get
that's
stronger.
where you plateau. So you got to get stronger.
Yep.
So that's kind of what this test is sort of pointing. That's pretty informative as far as a quick and pretty straightforward test that you can actually tell where a person needs to be working.
So how would you have, based on that test, if you had a Red River climber who was much better suited to be a boulder, so he does 3 reps of his on the moon board at 2 number grades below his max, how would you have him train? Would it be still get stronger?
It would still, so it'd be trying to bump those moon board reps up to 5 to 6. So what I would have him do is I would have him do what I call moon board reps, where you take problems of varying grades below your max, all the way down to, so 2 grades below, 3 grades below, 4 grades below, and you do the 1-to-1 work to rest on the board. So you do, say your Red River Gorge climber, more suited to be a boulderer, gets onto the moon board, does a 7C plus or a V10. I'd have does
First off, no Red River climbers do V10.
So that's why they need to climb on the moon board. Get some hard roots down there. Same probably holds true for maple climbers. So that person who, say, well, let's suppose, just for simplicity of percentages, they do this V10. And then on their reps, they're doing a V8, and they only do that 3 times.
Right.
What I would have them working on is in the V5, V6 range, have them doing 5 reps back to back in sets of those in that V5 to V6 range. So it's hard enough that they're having to actually climb the thing and recruit and actually do the problem. They're not just sort of hiking up it, but it's easy enough that they're completing the 5 reps.
Right.
So they start to build that, some folks might call it tolerance. I am kind of leaning toward it's just climbing strength. The ability, if you just assume that, we're trying to train to climb harder, that's the ultimate goal for most of us. So why don't we just have this climbing strength? What is climbing strength? And for me, I'm like, it's a 5-move boulder problem. That's a good representative of what climbing strength is.
Yeah. Do you think this is something that scales with all the levels?
So that's a good question. And that's one that I don't know right now, because I don't have the data for people below. So right now I've got data 7A climber in a day, all the way to 8A plus climber in a day. And then all ranges in between. But 7A is whatever, V5 or something like that, V6. So that, I don't know if it would scale below V6.
Right.
And that's an area where that's an area where the moon board gets hard.
Right.
Because if you're a V4 climber and you can do a 6B plus on the board, there's no 2 grades down problem to go do reps on.
Your options are pretty limited in that range. So
that's one of the questions that I am curious to find out if it does scale. I was actually quite interested in the fact that it scaled from V6 to V12. So that's that's a pretty big range. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you run into, or what do you think about someone who, and I don't see too many really experienced climbers, so I don't see many people in the V10, V11 range who have this issue, but I do see quite a few in the V6, V7 range that tend to just fall apart when they get tired, even if it's not strength that's the issue. Some mentally, their coordination just drops, whatever it is, they have a harder time just keeping it together and moving well.
Yeah.
Do you bump into any of that, and do you think that ends up being a factor?
Oh, I totally bump into that. And it is a factor. And one of the ways I've found to really address it is, we have this idea of intentional practice, you want to focus and be all, move your feet right and do all that stuff. And I try to think of ways to actually train that. How can I set up a structure of okay, do this grade route, do this grade route, do this grade route that will lead the person to practicing. So what happens is that's again where this 80% zone, and you can think of 80% roughly as about 2 to 3 grades below, in the case of boulders, 2 to 3 grades below your bouldering max. And that's kind of arbitrary to say that, but that's around the zone.
Sure.
And in the case of route climbing, it's usually about, I like to think about it as 2nd or 3rd try routes. So the 2nd or 3rd try routes, the boulder problems that you don't do first try, but you can do in a few tries, those are the areas where I think that person that starts to fall apart needs to really be focusing their time on.
Yep.
So if you think about like a 2 or 3 try route, so you have a 13A climber and they're out there always trying to red point their 13A, and it takes them like, a season, and they do their 13A, and then they move on to the next season and they do their 13A.
Right.
What's happening is they're only getting minimal practice at climbing at their limit, at the red point limit. So what I would have for that person, I'd say, okay, look, on your project day, warm up to maybe a 12B or a 12C. That's going to take you 2 tries. Mm-hmm. So that way, and just commit to it taking you 2 tries. Don't even try it on site. Just like go up, work it out.
Totally. Yep.
Lower off and be like, okay, now I'm getting my red point head on, and you do it. You try to do it at least. And in that way, they start getting the practice of being a little bit pumped. They know the moves, a little pumped. The moves are easy enough because the grade is lower that they know they can do the moves, make the clips, that sort of thing, and just get to the top. And it's like getting to the top on those grades that are hard enough to where you have to try, but not so hard that you're just maxing out all the time.
Yep.
And I found that works really, really well. I mean, I've had a few folks who, didn't have a very good lead head, for example. Could top rope like really hard routes, but
right,
leading just like started to fall apart.
Yep.
And what I had them do is just do sets of cascade intervals, triples at momentum. In this case, we had these long routes. I had knocked their grades down like 2 and 3 number grades. Mm-hmm. So like instead of upper end 512s, they're now climbing like 5.9s and easier 5.10s.
Yep.
But they're doing triples on them. So
right.
And they're these long momentum routes. And so that on the third route, they might be on a 10A that is normally just dead easy for them.
Yep.
But now they're pumped from doing 2 10As before that. So now, and they have to lead everything. So now they start getting used to making clips, being pumped, having to kind of rest when they need to rest.
Yep.
Go fast when you need to go fast, go slow, etc. And they start learning how to really red point at a grade that's physically well within their limits, and it just all becomes the tactical aspects of red pointing.
Right.
And I think the same goes true for bouldering. You just knock it down a few grades, and you just get used to success, and you start to learn how to you don't blow off the mantle at the top. You're like, oh, I can do that mantle. And then you get this V5 or whatever that this V10 climber normally does, and they're like, oh, I got to the mantle and fell off. It's like, well, okay,
right.
Now think about that next time, figure out the mantle. Yeah,
totally. I think that's really important. We do something really similar where we either do triples like you're talking about or up, down, ups, where they have to unclip on the way down, lead back up. And oftentimes we'll have them have an up, down, up project so that they can do the first 2, the up, the down, and the up becomes hard for them so that they've dialed in the moves. They really know they can do all these moves. They know all the clips. And they have to start thinking super tactically, and it lets them go for things, that they normally wouldn't go for because they know the moves. They know they can do the moves. They get pumped and they just go on autopilot and keep moving. And once that happens with someone, you can see it. You can see that they were like, holy shit, I just kept going. Like I grabbed 8 more holds after I thought I was going to fall.
Yeah.
And that's a big moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I think, I think that happens with a lot of people. Like, some of they can do these hard top rope routes, but it's like they just don't trust that they can just keep going. And you really got to learn. Anything hard I've ever did has been just a struggle fest at the top, like yelling, head whipping, and all that.
Exactly.
And it's like, that's how I get up routes eventually. But and I think you need to learn that. It's not like And I've seen some climbers who are like actually really, really, really high end climbers that struggle with the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, when they finally do their routes might be 14 plus, but it's like they hike it.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you could have done that like 10 tries ago.
Yep.
If you just tried a little harder.
Yeah, totally.
And it goes all the way up to the big number folks as well. It's not just unique to beginners in that area.
Yeah, and we see guys like you or guys like Chris Sharma or whoever going that hard at the top of a route, and for some reason there's been this, I don't want to call it a trend, but this idea in training for climbing that you should never go to failure. And I think that's one occasion where you should learn to go to failure in training.
Yeah.
Is because you need to learn that skill of going really hard. And whether it's a route or a boulder or whatever, you can't learn to turn your try hard on fully until you've turned it on and failed.
Exactly. Yeah. So. And I think that's where in the case of routes, outside, like drop the number grade down a little bit from your project, but have it still be hard enough to where you're red pointing it. And if you're red pointing it second try, you're going to be a little bit out of it. Like you're not going to be just hiking it.
Yeah. And if you are, step it back up a little bit.
Yeah, so step it up a little bit. So get it to where you actually have to try, but it's still easy enough to where you think you can do it. You know, as opposed to like getting on your project and like, okay, I'm going to go bolt to bolt again.
Right.
And on a boulder problem, the way that I found actually, because that's another area where I've seen some really strong climbers, they don't have the try hard, and the weight vest is the way to do is. So you put them on a boulder, it's mostly inside, and they try it. They eventually do it, so it's a hard boulder problem for them. Then you put a 5-pound weight vest on them. And it forces them to, they know they can do the problem, but now they've got to try that much harder to do the problem. So it forces them to really, really turn it on. Yeah,
I hadn't ever thought about that in terms of using a weight vest to try hard. I've experimented quite a bit with a weight vest and generally shy away from it when I'm talking to clients about it because I just don't want to ruin their technique. I don't want to get them hurt. But I think that's a good method. I had never thought about that. Because you do have to try that little bit harder. And for me, I have a really hard time turning on that try hard.
Yeah.
I think partly because I started as a trad climber. I was a Red River climber. I like to climb 80 feet, warm up to my try hard. And then I'm only trying at, 75%.
Yeah.
Because most of what I'm dealing with is pump.
Yeah, exactly.
So learning to climb at Wild Iris or to Boulder and Waco is difficult for me because you have to pull off the ground and go hard immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's been tough. I like the weight vest idea. I'm going to play with that for sure.
Yeah. I think, and I think it's limited. So, think about it as I use the weight vest a lot, but it depends on the climber, like where they are.
Sure.
You wouldn't want, someone who's just starting out, there's no reason to. This is more for like folks who are climbing pretty hard and they've got their tech, they're good climbers, all that stuff. They just don't try that hard.
Yeah. So I like it for that
stick
specific
it on
reason.
At the end of the workout and say, okay, now try to do that boulder problem again with this thing.
Yeah.
And usually it's funny because they can do it a lot of times and you're like, dude, that's 5 pounds more. Like,
yeah. And I catch myself all the time just trying to make things more and more and more efficient. Like I'll spend, like you said earlier, it'll take me 8 goes on something that I could have done second or third go because I'm still trying to smooth it out and I don't need to. That happens to me more on boulders than it does on routes. Or short routes to the Wild Iris. It happens to me there too, where I want everything to feel easy because that's what I'm used to, you know? And what I can call easy is maybe a higher level than a lot of people can because I'm used to being super, super efficient.
Yeah.
So I might be able to try at, my 85% might be easy to me. That might feel easy, but I can't go past that. Like it's hard for me to.
So that's kind of cool. So I would expect if you did the assessment that you would do significantly more than 5 reps on your moon board, 2 grades down.
Yep.
And that would indicate that. That's like saying you can go 85% all day long.
Yep.
But sometimes you don't go 95 or 105. Like there's that reserve. So the way I would say in that case, I'd say, well, okay, yeah, well now you're going to start projecting on the moon board, and when you start doing those projects, start adding the weight vest and like
Yep.
Really just kind of bump up that try hard.
That's cool. That's a cool idea. I like it. Are you still doing any of the other lifts in your assessment? Because I know you had deadlifts and pinch block stuff, and are you still thinking about any of that, or you stripped it away?
I've stripped it away, but I am thinking about it. Mostly because I stripped it away mostly to try to I really want to get a lot of data on the reps and the hangboard.
Mm-hmm.
And the easiest way to get people to do it is just say, like, I mean, you can cram that into a day.
Sure.
And be like, oh, this is just going to be a good training day. Why don't you just try to do this? And that gets the data for me. So that's kind of why I've stripped the weights away. And climbers, and I'm sure you definitely know this, that a lot of them shy away from weights.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I love lifting weights. I mean, I think it's a blast. And I lift weights to lift weights. Like, I don't lift weights to get stronger for climbing.
Right.
I lift weights to get stronger at lifting weights.
Right, sure.
Because I like it. So I had initially the deadlift, bench, and overhead press, and really wasn't getting a lot of information. But one thing I have come to the conclusion of, and this has pretty much been this summer, is the benefits of the bench press for bouldering. I think, it's always just sort of that, the F dude, like, oh dude, how much you bench? And that kind of gets the bench press thing. But lately, like, our crew has kind of been getting into it, and we're like trying these little powerlifting routines and that sort of thing. Sure. And we bench, like, I bench like 180 pounds or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But
like most climbers.
Yeah. And it's but I've noticed that, like, compression and just my feeling on the wall has gone up a lot. And I would put it, I'm putting it now, like, I used to say, okay, deadlift is probably the best lift just in general for climbers. But I've noticed that climbers, once you convince them to do it, can really deadlift pretty heavy compared to the normal population. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, well, it's probably not going to help them that much to deadlift even more if they're already showing up being able to do it pretty well.
Yep.
And pull-ups, people say, oh, pull-ups are good for climbing. But then it's like,
that's what we already do well.
You already do well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, how many pull-ups do you actually do in a day with your climbing? You do 400 moves. It's like you just done 400.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people are like, why aren't there any weighted pull-ups in my plan?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, because you did them all night long.
Yeah, exactly. But the bench, it's like, one, we're all weak at it.
Yep.
And two, it's good antagonist, gets all the stuff you don't normally use, but it also seems to really correlate well with compression and squeezing and bouldering. Like, it seems to really help that.
Are you doing barbell benching or? Okay.
Yeah.
Have you experimented at all with dumbbells or kettlebell?
I've tried the dumbbells. And so initially, I was doing, like, because I got really weak. I'm like in the incline bench, I can barely do anything. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, I'll do dumbbells with the incline bench.
Yep.
And I was kind of doing that, and it was sort of boring. Because like, oh, I'll do my 12 reps of this, and I was just bored. And then it was like, well, why don't I try to bench as much as I can? That sounds fun.
Yeah.
So we just started doing that, and it's like, okay, yeah, just put a bunch of weight on there and try to bench it.
Yep.
And the same goes with deadlifts and back squats. We've been doing back squats, and and it just becomes a lot more fun for me if I treat it a little bit more like climbing, like I'm trying to hit a certain weight. Sure. That sort of thing.
Yeah. And you got your bench press projects.
Got my bench press projects. Yeah. 225. That's the goal.
That's awesome.
Guys, they're just like,
climbers are so funny because in high school, I did a ton of bench pressing, because that's what guys did when I was in high school. Like, in fact, I don't know if I deadlifted like, I don't know, 15 times when I was in high school, something like that. Yeah. But I bench pressed 3 days a week, for years. Yeah. And was ridiculously strong for my size bench pressing, and still am pretty strong for my size bench pressing. But it's so interesting to see the difference between what a climber can pull versus the normal athlete, and what a climber can press versus the normal athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a huge difference. I just had a conversation with Dan John for the podcast a couple of days ago.
Oh, nice.
And he was talking about doing pull-ups with like 45 added pounds being hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I've got a guy right now who just did pull-ups with 145 added pounds.
Yeah.
You know? and he's like, what? You know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but he can't press, you know? He can barely press body weight.
145 pounds.
You know, exactly. So
yeah, it's crazy with that. The pulling and the pushing, and that's the thing. Like with deadlifting, like I can deadlift a lot, and I'm just not. I mean, it's not gonna help my climbing to be able to deadlift more.
Yeah, once you're at a
point.
certain place, once you've hit a certain standard, it's time to move on and shore up other things.
Yeah.
Do you have standards for these yet? Have you
So that's the
come
thing.
up with any numbers?
So the stuff on my website, the lifting is actually from Dan John. So most of that's from Dan John. The hanging was just sort of by experience. And hopefully that'll get a little bit more fine-tuned. But generally, no, I don't really have a good standard. And that's one of the things with the assessment. I'd like to start correlating the hanging and the moon board with actual red
Climbing
pointing
grades, right?
And see what, like, is there a certain amount you need to be able to hang as a percentage of body weight to be able to climb 14A? Like, is that, what is that?
Yeah.
And I have no idea.
Yeah. And I think that climbing is so crazy multifaceted. I mean, there's so many aspects of it that you're always going to find outliers who don't have to meet those numbers to climb 14A,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
My power is going to be nowhere near most 514 climbers is my guess.
Yeah.
I'm probably quite a bit more efficient than most 514 climbers. So it's going to run the gamut, but I think those standards are something really interesting to try to come up with and then just to aim for. I mean, it's not going to hurt you to aim for a higher standard
Right.
at any of these things.
Yeah.
So I think that's a cool idea. And yours are the first ones that I know of being out there, those numbers that you had put up. So I'm interested to see what those numbers become after you get more data on these things.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about the same thing, like how to come up with a big data set of people so that we can correlate it to this is what a 512 climber does. This is what a V5 climber does. I think that's cool. I think it's really important too.
I think so as well. Yeah. And it's, we're lagging in that. Like you can,
Yep, totally.
you take cyclists and it's, road cyclists in particular, and they send them to Fort Collins at age 14 and they're like, well, your road capacity just isn't there. You're not going to do it. You're off the team.
Right.
And you're like, whoa, okay. It's
Dan
heartbreaking for the
John
poor
was
14-year-old kid, but that's what happens is you get these guys that are just insane.
Yeah, Dan John was saying the same thing. Like, we've got all these numbers, and if a thrower doesn't meet these numbers, we know where he needs work.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. And if he does meet these numbers, you don't need to be in the weight room. Like, spend 15 minutes in the weight room every few days, and that's all you need. Just maintain it, and you need to work on your technique.
Yeah.
So that's pretty important. And I'm glad you're pushing in that realm. It's something we've been thinking about as well. I know the Lattice guys do it. I don't know who else out there has numbers to look for, but I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
Yeah, I did the Lattice thing last year.
How did that come out for you? Did it?
Well, it was funny because I did Tom's assessment, and classic, he sends it back like, it's a really cool assessment, really good measures.
I've seen several.
Yeah, he's got like the little little
gauges,
gauges things, and he's sort of like classic Brit, like, you must have a really strong mental game because you're really weak. I was like, so now it's kind of this running joke, like whenever any of us actually do something, it's like, oh, nice mental game. And so I was bound and determined. This was like January or something like that, and I was bound and determined to get my numbers up, at least to get them to like average on the hangboard, because I was literally like the weakest guy he had assessed for climbing grade. So I I trained for the hangboard. I trained to red point my hangboard numbers, and
Right.
ended up. So I started out, and I was like, I had to take 15 pounds off to hang one arm from the 18 mil edge.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the tests on the thing. And then when I finished in May, I could do that 15. I could do it with plus 20 pounds. with one
Okay.
arm.
That's a big
So
jump.
a huge jump. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, I'm going to kill it. And we were going to South Africa. So I was like, oh, I'm going to kill it when I get there. I had hit my numbers in pull-ups better than ever. Numbers on the hangboard way better than ever. Get to South Africa and I don't climb shit.
Really?
Yeah, I could hang from any hold I
Right.
wanted to, but I couldn't move. And what had happened, and this is what got me thinking about this whole assessment with the moonboard thing, is and also what, like Steve Bechtel is always talking about, like the 75% of the time shoes on, 25
Yep.
shoes off.
Totally.
And
Keep the goal.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
I'd heard that. I'd heard him say that thousands of times, but I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna just kill the hangboard.
Yeah,
And
you
I
let
did.
the goal become the hangboard.
I let the
and-
goal become the hangboard, and I crushed
and
it. But
you got it.
I forgot the climbing. So,
I think that's really important that you say that, because so many people let the training become the goal.
Yeah.
And I love training.
Yeah,
you
see,
know?
I'm the same way. Like, I was psyched
It's
to go to
important.
the gym and do my hangboard workout. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, I'm gonna hit my numbers today.
Yeah, and it's important to like the training. I love it. I love going in and working on new training protocols and trying new things. And, I love digging into my training plan, but climbing still has to be the goal. And a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
Training becomes the goal, and then they wonder why they're not climbing as well as they think they should be.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, totally. And I think that 75-25 is, and it's funny because I actually went back after that South Africa, because I've got notes on my training going way back.
yeah.
And I went through and counted it, like my good seasons when I had good sends here and there. And there I had a few of them. And I looked at my training, and it was literally like to the T between 75 and 80% climbing.
Yep.
And 25 and 20% other stuff.
Yeah.
Like over the course of like 14 years.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and
it's
all
like,
the
wow.
best strength coaches that I have read their stuff, talked to, Dan John just said it the other day that, we're, as strength coaches, we're 20% of the training. You know? Other than that, you need to be out there working in your sport.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think that idea has come home for sure.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to see where the assessment goes, what numbers you come up with, and I appreciate you sitting down and talking about it, and maybe I'll run myself and all the other power company guys through it so we can give you our numbers and
that'd be
throw them into the pool.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
cool. All right, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, anytime.
I think Steve's final anecdote there is an incredibly important one. Don't forget the climbing. It's really easy to get caught up in the numbers and forget that ultimately there are people of all types with all different types of athletic profiles who can climb the grades you're looking toward. Climbing is complex. Is there really even a such thing as a standard for any of these lifts or hangs for climbers? I'm not completely convinced that we're there yet. It's a really great idea. I'm a fan of the idea, but our preliminary data that we've collected through our own assessments shows that people who buck the supposed trend and can climb hard while missing several of the really important needed aspects aren't necessarily outliers at all, but more like the norm. Especially as we mention in this conversation, as you look into the grades below V8 or mid 513, the numbers get even more scattered. And coming up with just one single number, an average, to call a standard seems almost unfair. Many of our current standards are pulled directly from other sports. Steve mentions that many of his initial numbers came from Dan John. And Dan himself suggested in our conversation, which if you haven't heard it is episode 66, You should definitely go listen to that. Dan suggested that climbers' numbers should be pretty drastically different from the athletes that he coaches, who are largely throwers. So we're in the beginning stages here. I think we're on the right track, but so far, none of these numbers are the gospel. Everyone is, to some degree, experimenting here. And frankly, these experiments are important. So I'm not disparaging them. I understand the draw. We want to know where to focus our efforts. There's way too much to sift through otherwise. My advice: hire a coach. Even if it's just for a short private session, a good coach can give you direction based on your climbing, not just based on the numbers. And ultimately, that's what matters most. And remember, like Dan John says, the goal is to keep the goal the goal. Our goal is to become better climbers, not a stronger deadlifter, not a stronger bench presser, not to master the measurement standards. If those things help, great. That's great. But don't forget about the mindset, the tactics, your partners, your goals, your quality of movement, all those things that have much, much more difficulty measuring, the things that are harder to measure. They're just as important, if not more so. The goal isn't even to become a stronger climber. Who gives a shit if you get stronger and it doesn't help your climbing? Can that happen? Absolutely. I've seen it over and over. I've seen numbers go up massively in the weight room and on the hangboard with absolutely no carryover to climbing. Sometimes it's because they were strong enough already. Sometimes they just don't know how to apply it. Again, that's where a coach comes in. The numbers won't always tell you that that 30-second front lever you spent so long developing just doesn't show up at all when you don't trust those slippery smears on your project. But a coach will notice it. It's complicated, I get it, but that's what makes it so damned appealing. Okay, if you're in St. Louis or Virginia, look us up. We're coming your way. There's new tanks and tees on the website right now, new designs. You should go check those out, powercompanyclimbing.com. You might be able to find Steve Maisch at stevemaischtraining.com, but his website seems to be down right now. So Steve, if you're listening, fix your damn website. Everybody's asking. Just go do it. You know where to find us, all over the internets, on the Facebooks, on the Instagrams, at Power Company Climbing. You can find us on the Pinterest too, if you should desire that. You cannot and will not ever find us on the Twitter, because we don't tweet, we scream like eagles.
This time, to build.